Well, thank you, Jim. Thanks to the McAleese team for today's events. It's an honor to be before you and give a quick snapshot of the United States Space Force. Now, I've been in listening mode since becoming Chief of Space Operations about 4 months ago. One of my first phone calls was to the commander of U.S. European Command, General Cavoli. My first trip as the CSO was to Colorado Springs, where I sat down in person with my primary partner in crime, General Jim Dickinson. My first overseas trip was to Hawaii, where I had dinner and talked at length with Admiral Aquilino about the challenges in the Indo-Pacific Command. And during these last 4 months, I've also prioritized visiting with Guardians performing vital missions around the world for the Space Force, the Joint Force, and our nation. And in December, I had the privilege of meeting in person with military space chiefs from Australia, Canada, France, Germany, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. In all these engagements, my goal was to better understand how the Space Force should focus its near and midterm efforts as we integrate our capabilities to address the threats and challenges we face. The themes from these engagements won't surprise anyone here. Each combatant commander emphasized the vital role space plays in strategic competition and integrated deterrence. The Guardians of the Space Force make this possible, and I can assure you are without a doubt the best and brightest America has to offer. And because of these advantages and our shared interests in the domain, U.S. allies and international partners are eager for expanded collaboration within the Space Force, especially in areas that strengthen the effectiveness of coalition space operations and reinforce norms of responsible behavior in space. In short, our capabilities, people, and partnerships make the Space Force the most formidable space organization on the planet. China and Russia know this, and they are accelerating their efforts, as you heard from the Senator, to undermine U.S. advantages in the space domain. To meet this challenge, the Space Force will prioritize 3 lines of effort. First, we're going to field combat-ready forces. Second, I intend to amplify what I call the Guardian spirit. And third, we're going to establish partnerships with the express goal of winning the competition that we're in. Now, these lines of effort are designed to deliver forces, personnel, and partnerships that are required for the Space Force to preserve our U.S. advantages in space. Now, before I expand on these Space Force lines of effort, I'd like to update the audience here on some of the emerging conditions that Space Forces face. First, the space environment is dramatically shifting. In just over 3 years since the establishment of the U.S. Space Force, the international community has almost tripled the number of active satellites on orbit. To put that in context, from the start of the space race in the mid-1950s, up until 2019, there was steady growth to about 2,500 active satellites on orbit. And now at the start of 2023, we stand at over 7,400 satellites and counting rapidly. We're also seeing a significant growth in the number of total objects tracked. Think debris, think defunct satellites, rocket bodies, as well as the active satellites. From 18,500 when the Space Force started in 2019, today we are sitting at over 48,000 objects tracked. And I expect this proliferation to continue as well. Unfortunately, it's not just the congestion we must be concerned about. Space is undeniably a contested warfighting domain as well. When describing the space threats, it's important to account for 2 kinds. First, the threats from space assets, and second, the threats to space assets. Threats from space present a growing danger to the Joint Force. Both China and Russia have robust space capabilities that allow them to find, target, and attack U.S. military forces on land, at sea, and in the air. Equally alarming are the threats that endanger the satellites that our nation and others rely on for prosperity and security. Both China and Russia continue to develop, field, and deploy a range of weapons aimed at U.S. space capabilities. The spectrum of threats to U.S. space capabilities includes cyber warfare activities, electronic attack platforms, directed energy lasers designed to blind or damage satellite sensors, ground-to-orbit missiles to destroy satellites, and space-to-space orbital engagement systems that can attack U.S. satellites in the domain. The contested space domain shapes the enduring purpose of the U.S. Space Force. Congress established the Space Force to protect U.S. interests in space. The FY24 President's budget proposal requests $30 billion for the service, a $3.9 billion increase over the FY23 enacted. While this is only about a 3% total of the DoD budget, the U.S. Space Force intends to protect U.S. space capabilities and defend the joint force from space-enabled attack. We are shaping investments around critical space warfighting capabilities for the joint force as outlined in the National Defense Strategy and in support of Secretary Kendall's 7 operational imperatives. Now, my lines of effort are designed to achieve this vision by providing the forces, personnel, and partnerships required for the Space Force to preserve space superiority. My first priority will be to build resilient, ready, combat-credible space forces. To do this, we're accelerating the pivot towards resilient satellite constellations, ground stations, networks, and data links. The Space Development Agency's proliferated warfighter space architecture provides a prime example of these efforts. In FY24, we invest $2.6 billion to deliver initial warfighting capability for a resilient, proliferated, low Earth orbit constellation. We are also emphasizing cybersecurity and preparing Guardians to detect and defeat cyber attacks against our networks, systems, ground stations, data links. We're investing over $340 million in an operational test and training infrastructure that will be the backbone of our readiness as we prepare for a high-intensity fight. This infrastructure will allow Guardians to execute realistic training against simulated adversaries to validate our tactics. Space Training and Readiness Command executed one such exercise last September with its inaugural Black Skies exercise focused on electromagnetic warfare. Through these events, we are continuously enhancing tactics and operational concepts to create a ready force for the emerging threats. My second priority is to amplify the Guardian spirit by embracing a modern talent management process that recruits the best talent, develops and retains an elite workforce, and empowers our Guardians to succeed. One example is our constructive service credit program that allows experienced professionals from key fields to directly commission into the Space Force at ranks appropriate to their civilian experience. The first constructive credit board served as a pilot program in 2022 and recruited 7 cyber professionals to become Guardians, one of which was onboarded as a lieutenant colonel. Over the last year, we have also deployed space-centric curriculum for basic military training, Reserve Officer Training Corps, and Officer Training School. In addition, our partnership with the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies for professional military education begins this summer. With congressional support, we will improve our modern talent management system by integrating the Air Force Reserve space element into the Space Force as a single component. This will allow Guardians to transition between full-time and part-time duty to pursue opportunities outside full-time military service and subsequently return to full-time duty without barriers to re-entry or detriment to their career. We will ensure that such experience is utilized in strict and careful compliance with federal acquisition and ethics regulations. The single service personnel management system will make retaining highly qualified Guardians easier by facilitating flexible career paths. We look forward to working with Congress on this important initiative this fiscal year. My third priority is to strengthen partnerships the Space Force relies on to accomplish our mission. By way of example, we are investing $99 million in FY24 and over $1 billion across the FYDP to enact our vision for an updated space launch range of the future. Developing innovative commercial launch technology ensures the U.S. outpaces global competitors and supports an accelerating domestic space launch market. In doing so, we maintain safe and assured launch for commercial, civil, and Department of Defense users. Additionally, the Space Force will strive to eliminate barriers to collaboration, including overclassification, so we can build enduring advantages with our partners. To date, personnel from over 50 countries have participated in training, education, exercises, and wargaming events hosted by the U.S. Space Force. We are also leveraging allies and partners to expand our warfighting capability. Recent examples include deploying U.S. payloads on Norwegian and Japanese satellites, and establishing a partnership with Luxembourg for satellite communication services. In total, we have more than 200 foreign military sales cases with over 60 countries for a broad spectrum of space capabilities. Commercial partners will be key as we pursue emerging technology like advanced power and propulsion technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and even in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing. Space Systems Command's Commercial Services Office is building these partnerships to improve our ability to leverage more commercial off-the-shelf capabilities. I think it's also important to note that our industry partners are vital to our ability to deter and, if necessary, defeat China. I need the space industrial base to ensure key investments deliver on cost and schedule. Investments like the $2.3 billion we're putting towards resilient missile warning and tracking. This mix of low and medium Earth orbits and corresponding ground segments continue our pivot from a legacy missile warning architecture to a proliferated multi-orbit force design designed to address tracking of emerging threats. Investments like Space Force's Ground Moving Target Indicator, or GMTI system, which will provide actionable information on adversary surface targets to the warfighter through the Air Force's Advanced Battle Management System, is an integral part of the Joint All-Domain Command and Control program. As we have consolidated all military satellite communications programs into the Space Force now, we are executing developmental SATCOM investments to evolve our structure to disaggregated strategic and tactical satellite architectures, while responsibly managing existing programs of record. Examples include $332 million for the Mobile User Objective System, you may know it as MUOS, and its service life extension. $493 million for protected tactical SATCOM and protected tactical enterprise services, and $633 million for the evolved strategic SATCOM system. Also included is $165 million for hybrid SATCOM efforts and $74 million for our commercial SATCOM portfolio. Lastly, critical analysis underpins all our investments and future plans. The FY24 budget requests $101 million for force design analysis for kill chain support, moving target indications, communications to the tactical edge, position navigation and timing, data links, and responsive launch. As I come up on my time this morning, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share these priorities today, as well as a few snapshots of where we plan to put our investment dollars. The Space Force is the preeminent military space organization in the world. Our adversaries seek to surpass the United States and to challenge our advantage. We cannot and will not allow this to happen. Side by side with great partners like you, our Guardians will outwork, out-innovate, and out-compete our adversaries to ensure that we succeed. They will do everything they can to deter conflict and maintain stability in space. It is my job to ensure they're organized, trained, and equipped to meet the threats facing us today and into the future, and I believe the FY24 budget is a vital step in achieving that objective. I look forward to your questions, and as always, Semper Supra.
Senators, we have about 10 minutes questions. General Polakowski, forgive me, ma'am.
General Saltzman.
Is this working? Yeah. Ellen Polakowski, I don't know, chair.
Legend of the acquisition community, yes ma'am.
Yeah, my question has to do with the growth of commercial, and we've seen the success of Starlink with respect to Ukraine, but then at the same time this week, General Dickinson pointed at, to quote Gwen Shotwell, we don't want to weaponize Starlink. And so I'd kind of like to get your thoughts about how does the Space Force leverage the commercial community and at the same time recognize that limitation. I mean, how do you deal, if you put a portion of your comms on Starlink, but you can't use them to, quote unquote, close the fire control loop? What does that mean?
Well, thank you for such a simple question, ma'am. I really appreciate that. So let me start by saying we've really observed some amazing trends here in this most recent modern warfare. Commercial augmentation does provide capabilities. It can rapidly augment military capabilities. And it turns out it's a much harder target set for an adversary to try to disrupt. And so we shouldn't miss those important observations. I think the real key to success for making sure that commercial augmentation is available throughout the spectrum of conflict is that we talk early, up front, and we pre-plan and establish expectations. We are currently in the process of going through what we're calling Commercial Augmentation Space Reserve, which is really just a craft-like model to evaluate types of services that could be augmented from commercial. Satellite communications being a great one. Space domain awareness is another. Intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. All things that the commercial industry can provide, and we're working through policy considerations, contractual considerations, legal considerations to figure out how we employ them ahead of time. We think about this ahead of time so that we're not trying to do this on the fly during a crisis. But that's the idea, is to plan for that scenario so that we can account for it ahead of time. Thank you.
General, thank you very much.
John Angelon, my question is relevant to professional development. You really made an argument for a close nexus between the Space Force and industry. Would you consider having industry, working ways with industry to be involved in that training exercises or professional development, since there's such a heavy emphasis between their mission set and what industry would be supporting and providing?
Well, because the short answer is yes. Because they're so critical to our operations today, they are integrated into current exercises and war games. The commercial integration cell that's at the Combined Space Operations Center of Vandenberg is a perfect example of that, where they are involved in day-to-day operations as well as the exercises and war games that we do. But is there room for expanded opportunity? Absolutely. I think the faster commercial services grow, the faster those capabilities shift, the more we need to be involved in terms of exercises, war games, planning drills, day-to-day operations, so that we fully understand what the capabilities can and can't do throughout the spectrum of conflict. Yeah.
Thank you, General. Over here, John Harper with Defense Scoop. You mentioned the $340 million investment or the request for operational test and training infrastructure. Can you provide some more details about what exactly that will entail?
Sure. We're still working through all the details, but just in general terms, as we shift from a largely, this goes back some years, but where we thought of space as more of a benign environment, our focus was on how do we get satellites to last as long as possible on orbit doing the missions that we need. It wasn't prioritized to the same degree about thinking about a contested domain. Now we are prioritizing that, obviously. But I don't have the training facilities and infrastructure that allows us to do the kinds of simulations and trainings I need. So the simulators are built around procedural currency with the weapon systems, not necessarily interacting with a thinking adversary. So we want to enhance the simulators. We also recognize that range activities, which are so important to all of the other services to practice their skills, to validate concepts, to validate tactics, we don't really have that either. So we're expanding our capabilities to do constructive virtual training and ranges so that we can conduct those kind of events.
Space and counter space operations?
Yeah, it's a great question because, I don't think about it in those terms. Operations can be offensive or defensive, and of course we're going to practice the full spectrum of operations so we can offer the Secretary of Defense and the President a full scope of independent options. That's what's required of us. But, we don't talk about offensive F-35s and defensive F-35s. It's the operations they perform, and actually going through those war games and going through the exercises is where we develop those operational concepts.
Hi, General. Thank you for being here. Jack Simerson with the Epic Times. A couple questions. One, when it comes to China, what role does the Space Force have? Are we lagging behind China as it pertains to space capabilities? What do we need to do to catch up with them if we need to? And the second is the International Space Station, the primary purpose is scientific research. Does it need to evolve to be into the military sector?
Say that second part again.
Does the International Space Station need to also have a military focus?
Yeah, I certainly would leave that to NASA to decide. I can't imagine why they would need a military purpose. That's why we have the Space Force. That's why you have the Department of Defense, is to think through military contingencies. And so I think we're well structured there. In terms of China, we are not lagging behind. That is not the way to characterize this. All right. So if you were conducting a war game and you were picking which Space Force in the world you wanted on your side, you would pick the United States Space Force. We have the greatest capabilities. We have the most capable force, the envy of the world. Right? So when we talk about a gap, what I'm worried about is we're out in front of the race and we're running the race, if you want to call it a race. I don't even call it a race. But how fast is the competition closing on us? How fast do they want to close the gap that they see? And it's that pace and it's the mix of the weapon systems that they're pursuing. That's what's got us concerned. And so we're looking back and saying, what do we need to do next to make sure that we can counter our competition? But the United States Space Force is the premier service in the world, so I'm not characterizing it as a gap at all.
Chief, thanks for doing this. And
Sure.
It's a good thing you were able to come, because I think if you didn't, DoD wouldn't be represented at a senior level at this event, and Jim would be really embarrassed. Question to you. You talked very articulately about how the Space Force is taking advantage of being small, light, lean, new, to do things differently in the personnel and human capital. As you look at requirements, as you look at resourcing, as you look at acquisition, are there areas in those big processes where you're particularly focused in the coming year on taking advantage of the light and lean and new to do things better?
Great question, Jamie. Thank you. I have talked about the advantages in personnel management and talent management that comes with being smaller. I really feel like we almost manage each individual on a case-by-case basis. What's best for the Space Force for this person? How do we optimize this person's value to the organization? And we're really able to, like I said, do individual tailored force development for our Guardians. It's not quite like that, because obviously we have thousands of people to consider, but considering the case of other services, we really can focus individually on capability, on our personnel. With regards to how does that lean and agile then apply to acquisition, it's not lost on this group that we still plug into the Department of Defense, and we still are beholden to all of the same regulations and legislative requirements that come with being an acquirer for the Department of Defense. What I've been really impressed with is the way Frank Calvelli, who is now focused on space acquisition inside the Pentagon, is able to set standards and hold the industry base to those standards. Small contracts, leverage advanced technology where we can so we can reduce non-recurring engineering costs. He's thinking in terms of 2 or 3 years to prove out a concept, not these long-term 10 years of AOAs and those sort of things. So the way he's viewing it and how flat the organization is, he gets feedback very low to him very fast and can raise it into the departmental level decision forums. And so I think there's a lot of promise in how he's going about setting up the acquisition and the flatness of the organization to get him the kind of feedback he needs to make the enhancements.
So we've got 2 minutes left. Can we look at the last 3 questions? One here, there, and there. Thank you, sir.
Courtney Alvin from C4IS ARNet. You mentioned responsive launch. Congress for the last few years has been adding funding for tactically responsive space. Where does the Space Force stand in developing its strategy for how to use that, how it wants to buy those capabilities, and is there funding in the 24 budget for that?
Yeah, there is. It's a combination of the technical requirements, the contractual arrangements, which we're investing in, and proving the concepts, because you made a nice switch there. I probably did say responsive launch, but tactically responsive space is the better way to describe that, because it's not just launching something, it's not just the launch aspects. It's once the satellite is on orbit, how fast can you get it into operations? How fast can you use it? That's the tactically responsive nature of this, and we're going through a series of exercises and demonstrations to prove out that concept, which then informs some of the contractual arrangements, which proves out, do you store or do you store on orbit? We're working through all those with our demos and exercises.
You mentioned that you are looking at utilizing more of the Air National Guard for a space component. Could you expand more upon that? Yesterday you had talked with SAS about the potential of a Space National Guard. How does your plan compare with that? And what kind of budgetary burden are you looking for that?
Yeah, thank you, because that's an important clarification. The legislative proposal that we're working with Congress on this year is about the Air Force Reserve element being integrated into the Space Force, and that's a slight nuance. It's not addressing the Air National Guard space element. So we've just separated those two for the purposes of working through with Congress on how we're going to integrate that. The question I got yesterday about the Space National Guard or an Air National Guard, I'll say the same thing here. The capabilities that currently reside in the Air National Guard are critical to the success of the Space Force. It encompasses a large percentage of our deployable capabilities, which are critical to the combatant commands. So I have to maintain access to the equipment, the people, the experience, the capabilities that currently reside in the Air National Guard. General Brown, I think, would tell you that because he no longer has organized, train, and equip responsibilities for the space missions, he has passed that to the Space Force, that it creates a little bit of a disconnect. And so that means the current status quo has some problems that we have to sort out. There's a number of ways to move forward on that. We're evaluating both the cost and the procedural issues associated with moving the money, the people, the equipment, those missions, to see how it might best play out. But there's still some analysis going on with regards to the Guard.
Good morning, General. This year's
with Boeing.
Okay.
My question is, do you feel like the Space Force is on a wartime footing right now? And if not, what would you like to see happen in the acquisition and operations pace to kind of get us to that level?
Yeah, you know, if you look at it in binary terms and you say that the structures that we built, the training requirements that we had were largely built around a relatively benign domain, and we recognize now that there's a shift. If you want to call it, if you want to say it's a binary capability, then we've got work to do. I don't think that's the best way to look at it, though. There's not some day in the future where if X, Y, and Z are accomplished, I will say we are now ready. It's more about a spectrum of readiness. I'm ready today. Like if something goes down, the Space Force is going to be there. But I want to be more ready tomorrow, and I want to be more ready the next day. So it's about how fast we can shift and pivot to resilient architectures that we think will support deterrence, and how fast I can provide the tools to our Guardians to do the kind of training they need to be ready to deal with a dynamic thinking adversary. And tomorrow's going to be better than today, and so forth and so on.
Another brilliant briefing by Senator Rhodes.
Thanks,
I'm never going to live that way.
No, you will not.
Please welcome General Saltzman.
Thank you all.